Welcome back, apprentices and wizards. Today we're going to draw the full figure, but not as before. Like in most courses, we draw the standing figure at attention. Here, we're going to give it life. We're going to give it personality. We're going to give it a fantastical feel. We're going to make it look alive. For that, we'll use contrapposto. But beyond that, well, contrapposto, if you don't know what that is, by the way, it's the balance of the figure, usually resting on one weight-bearing leg. We have that beautiful bend, that beautiful illusion of life. But we can take it way beyond that, of course. We are going to get into the world of finding what makes a character seem like it's about to walk off the page or step out of a painting. That's what we're going to learn today. The joy and wonder of it all, the fluidity of it all, and the idea that drawing goes way beyond just making marks on paper. It makes us feel alive. It makes us feel we're part of something, especially within the fantasy realm. So let's bring it into our art. Let's get started. Let's have a look at some wedging forms. When I first heard that term, it seemed like woodwork to me, but it's a brilliant idea for understanding that we're drawing on a 2D plane, a flat piece of paper or a canvas, but we are interpreting 3 dimensions. And the way to do that is myriad. We can overlap, we can add thick lines in front of thin lines, a million ideas to give the illusion of dimension and the illusion of form, receding in space and overlapping, and above all, being fleshy and real for our fantasy figures. With something so complex, I don't want to think like that. I want to enjoy art. So Mr. T and Mrs. V are my first call. T for the shoulders, sternum, and linea alba right through the navel, and Mrs. V for the crutch. Then halfway for that 10th rib, halfway again for the crest of the hip. It can't be easier. It's little halves. Find out what side is stretching, what side is pinching. It's easy to see using this tubular idea. And half again for that pubic bone. Rudimentary halves, by the way. We can vary them. If you're in that proximity, then no one can argue it, because people are varied. But that will get me where I need to be, and then I can adjust slightly for any model that might be a little different from that. And it's a good way to understand when you're drawing a long torsoed model that you're working within these parameters, and then you see a model that doesn't fit them, and immediately you know they're a long torsoed person. And you know that because you know what a method is to find that, rather than be back to square one every time you go to live draw or interpret a figure. It seems to be no method because everyone's a little different, but everyone is in this ballpark, especially in the torso. So get the torso right, and then we can start to really put our style on it. So knowing a method will give us the freedom to explore style, rather than always be drawing the fundamentals and wondering why they change so much with each model. And of course, pentimento is our friend. How many times I've drawn that ovoid for a head there. So, a system. You can mix it up. You can change it out. I do it often. But here, I'm boiling it down to the most simple and valuable ideas that I've found that work every time. And then you can add to it, or delete some of it, or merge some of it. So when the head looks right at us, we have the eyebrows aligning with the ears. Tilt down a little, and the ears go up. Tilt up a little, the ears go down. This accordion idea, where we pinch
and we get wider on the other side. Another thing to keep in mind all the time. The hips are fused, and so they just tilt. And they go back and forth, but they're always fused. So you can line them up, and that's terrific. So you have something that is constant. Whereas in between these two forms, we have the beauty of the obliques on the sides and the stomach on the front. And there I'm just notching in the 10th ribs, and you can line the 10th ribs up as a tilt. You can't line the clavicles up unless the arms are regimented, as the clavicles lift up and down. But the 10th rib stays where it is, so that little notch is important to find the tilt. I'm going to draw a figure with less than 8 heads high as the go-to. And that creates something very real. It creates someone that we know, an average person. Obviously, we don't want average people in our stories. But what we want is someone we can relate to. And so what we hang on these characters is personality. And the personality is king in every story. And we can relate to a person that is closer to the human rather than the superhuman. And that's what I'm developing here. So we can take the torso, and the easiest way for me, rather than think of 7.5 or 6.5 heads that you hear a lot of, is to get the torso practically universal, and then just shorten the legs or arms or lengthen them for superheroes. It's a basic 2 heads down to the bottom of the knee from the crutch, and a basic 2 heads down to the flat foot on the ground for 8 heads. And of course, you just shorten those if you want. Now, there's another method as well. You can use the 8 heads and thicken the limbs. It'll give the impression of someone shorter than the average superhuman 8-head high model. I say superhuman, it's not really superhuman. There's lots of approximate 8-head people walking around. But it's from the 8 upwards that we start to see the gods and the superheroes. So that's the kind of benchmark for perfect. If we were to say, where do we want a hero to look majestic? 8 heads and up. But look at the beauty of this little character here by just fleshing it out a little and just curving around now to keep in mind that this isn't on a flat surface. So we're getting into the realms now of volume. And we can get that with line alone, just by the positioning of it. And then we can further enhance that with the broad end of the pencil to show more weight. A million things we can do. So it's amazingly powerful, the idea of just line. Now what I'm doing here is adding a hand onto the body and then adding the arm after. I find that easier. If you were to start with the shoulder and try and bring the arm down, it might be too long. By placing the hand, it's a little tip from me, where you want it to be, then it's easier to see how the arm would reach down to that point. Remember, these are drawings from imagination. And that's very helpful. Even in a life draw class, that's the way to do it for my understanding of things being in a simple world rather than a complex academic world of measuring with thumb and line. Because great as that is, it does kill the fluid motion of gesture. Because once you leave the page to measure, you're out of the world of gesture. It's very hard to get back into it, especially if it's a stop and start idea. Now this little contrapposto business with the weight bearing leg is the straighter leg. The straighter leg will have the pinch on it. It's easy to remember. And now look at the character we're getting in this little drawing. based on the rhythm and the forms wedging and curving around particular moments. And the pentimento helps us here too. So this is a joy. For me, if there's no joy, there's no point. Because I didn't get into this business to think of it as a business. The business idea came after the fact. We all want to make a living of some sort. And I wanted to make my living in art. So I knew I had to learn stuff. But it was always joy. And it's that joy for what I do that has maintained my long career in art. For me, it's not a job anymore. That's just a byproduct. This is a constant world of wonder for me. And just getting that little carpal idea in there. As the hand twists up like that, it's nice to show the wrist area. Remember, the wrist is below the bones of the forearm. The wrist is between the metacarpals of the fingers and the ulna and radius of the forearm. So remember that little gap. Here I go with my broad belt idea to find the superior and the inferior end of the hip crest. So the superior end at the top, meaning as it is, superior, the top of, is where the sartorius comes off. And below that on the inferior end is where the legs insert. I'm just finding the edges of bones, that's the main thing. And putting a little curve on them. Trying out a thicker hip there. High on the hips is something I always go to see if I can just add a little bit more height. And it always has that beautiful curvy feel to it. Has a lovely fluid end to an idea. And it's this mix of bones and curves that creates solidity and help us understand where things do actually insert and wedge into. So wedging forms, very important idea for me. Take that upper ab end in. It's wedging in to the lower ab. And the lower abs have this lovely curve to them on the female figure. I'm indicating all this stuff. I'm coming back after the fact and putting in smaller ideas. The nipples on the off-centered edge of the breast, not in the center. So remember that. It's probably one of the biggest learning ideas that came to me quite a long way into my career, actually. So reiterating the egg shape to bring me down to that lower ab and encompass the idea of two shapes being overlapped that are similar in size. So fading back with a chamois or a tissue, and then reiterating the freshness of ideas, again with a different colored pencil, will really enforce your internal art engine. And also give you that beautiful idea of how much can we change this. I'm bringing the hips out further. As long as they come into those bones, the bones don't change. You can flare them out. You can flare the hips out just below the great trochanter, where the widest point begins, as much as you like. And look how much shorter the body seems to be when you do that. So many characters can be created just by varying off these ideas. The ovoid of the head there. For everyone, the widest part is above the ears of the head. So things are universal. The skull doesn't move much. It doesn't change much, but some people have bigger heads and smaller heads. Making little notes all the time. And when you write the notes down, it really sticks. I totally endorse that idea. So much better than writing it down in a separate notebook. So newsprint, notes on a page. If anything has accelerated my ascent into understanding how all of this works, it's those two elements. Newsprint drawings and notes on the very edges. And it's not new. Just look at Michelangelo's drawings and you'll see why that is such an incredible idea. and it's being used in universities now as if it's a new idea. This is how we go into higher learning and critical thinking, by keeping it all in one place like this. So coming down and finding those 3/4 views, even though it looks like half. Normally you look at the face and it's tilted slightly into one half that's a little bit wider than the other. By drawing the vertical line, it's easier to see that. So these moments, reiterations, are very important for understanding that puff, for instance, and how it's a little longer on the arm that's pulling away from the body. The 7th and 8th rib there, where it pokes out before going back into the body. And note I say into, because we're talking about wedging forms. Pubic bone coming down to find the top of the great trochanter. Marvelous ideas. You walk into the life draw class without any of this knowledge, you're in the dark, basically. And everything is about looking, seeing, and copying what you see. And if that's the only way you ever approach a drawing, then you're back to square one every single time you walk in the door. And there are so many artists that do that. And it's painful. And after a while, they give it up. Not everyone, but it's easier to give up something that is painful than something that is a joy to do, which is what I'm doing here. So legs can appear short on the female figure due to the relative thickness of them compared to men's legs, which are usually quite spindly in comparison, especially the lower legs. And so the old paper book jacket artists used to lengthen the lower legs just to get more statuesque figures. You don't need to do much to change that.